The rain hadn't stopped all day. It poured as if the clouds themselves were grieving, draping the small town of Willowbridge in a constant, quiet curtain of sorrow. The streets were mostly empty now, puddles spreading like tiny lakes across the worn pavement, glistening under the dim orange glow of the streetlights. It was one of those days where everything felt heavier, like the world had tilted slightly off balance. 17-year-old Amelia Quinn stood beneath the narrow awning of Bell's bookstore, her arms wrapped tightly around her damp coat, as if trying to hold herself together. Her school bag hung from one shoulder, sagging with the weight of soaked notebooks and forgotten lunch wrappers. Her shoes squelched uncomfortably every time she shifted her weight, and the cold had long since crept through her socks and into her bones. She had missed the bus. Again. She always told herself she wouldn't, but life had a way of interfering. That afternoon it was her little brother's forgotten science project. The one he left at the community center. Amelia had raced across town, dodging rain, grabbing the smudged cardboard and plastic volcano before it could be tossed in the trash. By the time she returned to the bus stop, the last one had gone, and so had the sun. She tilted her face toward the clouds and let out a slow breath, watching it mist in front of her lips. It felt like the world was holding its breath too. And then she saw him. Across the street, half hidden in the rain, was a figure sitting motionless on an old iron bench. His outline was slouched, small against the backdrop of the empty town square. The boy's clothes clung to him like a second skin, completely soaked, and he wore no jacket. Just a threadbare shirt and jeans that had darkened to near black from the water. At first, she thought he might just be another kid waiting for a ride. But then she noticed his eyes. Red. Not from the weather, not from the wind, but from something else entirely. Pain. She recognized him. His name was Eli. He had transferred to her school earlier that year, slipping into the student body like a ghost. Everyone knew he came from the foster system. No parents, no relatives. He sat at the back of the class, never raised his hand, barely made eye contact. The teachers didn't push him, and the students didn't notice him. Except for Amelia. She remembered him from the library one afternoon, tucked between the shelves in the astronomy section. He hadn't been reading, just staring at a page, like he was somewhere far beyond the ink and paper. She'd smiled at him on instinct. He hadn't smiled back. Now, watching him through the rain, something inside her stirred. Not pity, no, Eli didn't wear pity well. It was something closer to recognition. A quiet ache that whispered, "I've felt that kind of alone too." Without thinking, without weighing the consequences or listening to the part of her that usually warned her to keep her distance, Amelia stepped off the curb and crossed the street. The rain found her instantly, soaking her again within seconds. Her hair stuck to her cheeks, her coat grew heavier, and the water in her shoes turned from uncomfortable to unbearable. But she didn't stop. When she reached the bench, Eli didn't look up. He didn't move. His hands were clasped together in his lap, trembling slightly from the cold. She could see that his nails were bitten short, the skin around them raw. A bruise bloomed faintly along the side of his jaw, half hidden by wet strands of hair. Still, he said nothing. Amelia stood there for a moment, heart pounding, unsure what to do now that she was this close. What do you say to someone who looks like the world has already given up on them? She looked down at her own wrist. There, snug against her skin, was a bracelet. A small thing she had made years ago at summer camp. Beads of turquoise and gold, some of them chipped, one shaped like a tiny crescent moon. She wore it often, not because it was valuable, but because it reminded her of simpler times. Safer times. Slowly, she unhooked it. She stepped forward, bent down slightly, and gently lifted his hand. His skin was ice cold, and she could feel the tension in his fingers, as if he were ready to pull away. But he didn't. With quiet care, she fastened the bracelet around his wrist. He stared at it, blinking once, twice. His brows furrowed, confused. And then she whispered, so you don't feel invisible." The words floated between them, soft as the rain that fell around them, softer still than the space they had both been living in, apart, unnoticed, quietly hurting. Eli looked up then. Really looked. There was something in his eyes that shifted, something subtle but unmistakable. Not relief. Not even gratitude. Just the stunned realization that someone saw him. Truly saw him. Not as a project. Not as a problem. But as a person who mattered enough for someone to cross a street in the cold. He didn't speak. But he nodded. It was small. Barely more than a dip of his chin. But it was enough. Amelia didn't wait for thanks. She didn't ask questions. She simply stood, took one last glance at the boy on the bench, and turned back toward the bookstore. She was colder than ever, soaked to the skin, and her bag was likely ruined. But something about her heart felt warmer. Behind her, the rain continued to fall. And Eli sat a little straighter, one hand resting over the bracelet like it was the only real thing in the world. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel invisible. The corner of Maple and Fifth still smelled like rain, even on clear days. Amelia Quinn passed it each morning on her way to her flower shop, tucked between an old bakery and a thrift bookstore that hadn't changed its window display in 5 years. The town of Willowbridge moved slowly, and in many ways, Amelia had too. She was no longer the girl standing under the bookstore awning, drenched and worried about missing the bus. That girl had been 17, full of fragile hopes and hands that tried to hold too much. Now she was 24, her palms roughened by thorns and long hours, her eyes sharper, wiser, though still, sometimes, too soft. Her hair was always tied back in a neat bun, held by the same silver pin she'd worn since her mother's illness began. Her laughter had grown quieter, more measured, and she'd perfected the kind of smile people expected from someone who sold flowers for a living, sweet, gentle, and a little bit sad. Her shop, Wild Grace, was a modest space painted in faded blue, with hanging ferns by the door and a chalkboard sign that read, "Come in, the daisies are smiling." She arranged bouquets with aching hands most days, sometimes forgetting to eat lunch or drink her coffee while it was still warm. The locals loved her. Mrs. Hartley from the post office brought her biscuits every Thursday, and Officer Drew always bought sunflowers for his daughter after piano recitals. But in the quiet moments, when the last customer left and the wind rustled the ivy outside, Amelia still thought of Eli. It had been 7 years since the day she crossed the street in the rain and gave a broken boy a bracelet so he wouldn't feel invisible. She never saw him again after that day. Not at school, not in the square, not in the places you expect to run into someone if they still exist in your world. He vanished. Like a wisp of cloud that dissolved into blue sky. One day he was sitting in the rain, eyes full of grief. The next, he was nowhere. For a while, she tried asking about him. She mentioned his name casually at school once or twice, only to be met with blank stares or shrugged shoulders. Someone thought his foster family had moved. Another said he transferred again. Nobody really knew, and nobody really cared. But Amelia cared. Not in the way girls care when they have crushes or daydreams. Her caring was quiet and private, wrapped around that single moment on the bench when his eyes met hers, when he nodded and held on to the bracelet like it was the only thing tethering him to the earth. Sometimes, she wondered what became of him. Did he keep the bracelet? Did he even remember her name? The years didn't bring answers, just more distance. Her life filled with other things, her mother's diagnosis, hospital bills that came in thick envelopes, and the weight of keeping the lights on when the town's economy dipped. Her dream of studying botany in the city dissolved like sugar in tea, too sweet to last. Instead, she learned how to make do. To stay. To survive. She turned passion into practicality, opened the flower shop using her savings and a small loan from the local credit union. Her days became structured, open at 8, prep bouquets, small talk with customers, close at 6, check on her mother, eat something if she remembered, sleep if she could. But in the stillness between routines, Eli lingered. There were days she stood outside her shop, staring at the bench across the street, half expecting to see him there. She told herself it was silly. That one rainy afternoon shouldn't have meant so much. She didn't even really know him. But something in her heart refused to let go. Because it hadn't just been a bracelet. It had been a message. A connection. A moment when two people, both broken in quiet, unseen ways, saw each other. She tried once, years ago, to write about it in a journal. The words came slow and clumsy. He looked like he didn't believe in kindness anymore. And I just wanted him to feel real. She kept that page. It was tucked in a shoebox under her bed, along with a few pressed flowers and the spare bead from the bracelet she'd given away. There were other people in Amelia's life, of course. She dated a boy named Chris for a while. He was kind, good with her mother, and always brought her lemon muffins. But something was always missing. Some unnameable ache that wouldn't quiet. When they broke up, he said, "You're kind, Amelia, but sometimes it feels like part of you's somewhere else." He wasn't wrong. That somewhere else was a rainy bench in Willowbridge, and a boy whose silence had said more than any poem ever could. It was funny, she thought, how someone who was in your life for less than an hour could live inside your memory for years. She hadn't spoken to Eli since that day. No letter. No social media. Nothing. But she never forgot. She never stopped wondering whether he got out of town. Whether he ever found a home that didn't feel temporary. Whether the bracelet she gave him had ever made a difference. Or if it, like so many other childhood things, had been lost along the way. Amelia never told anyone about him. Not her friends, not her mother, not even herself, not really. She tucked him away like a pressed flower between the pages of her life. Fragile, forgotten by the world, but not by her. Some nights, when the rain came hard and steady, and her shop lights cast soft golden shadows through the window, Amelia would sit by the register, cup of tea in hand, and look out toward the bench across the street. Empty. But in her heart, never entirely. Because some silences, no matter how long they last, never lose their meaning. It started with an envelope. No fanfare. No knock at the door. Just a plain, cream-colored envelope slipped beneath the front door of Wild Grace, the way people used to pass secret love letters under desks in school. Amelia noticed it in the early morning, before she flipped the sign on the shop door from closed to open, just as the sun peeked between the clouds and the dew clung to her window displays. There was no name on the front. No address. Just a wax seal pressed into the flap, a delicate impression of a crescent moon. Her fingers froze. It had been years, but she hadn't forgotten. Not the shape of the charm. Not the way it had rested against Eli's wrist when she slipped the bracelet onto him in the rain. She blinked. Shook her head. Probably a coincidence. Crescent moons were everywhere, on jewelry, on coffee shop logos, on children's books about dreams. Still, her hands trembled slightly as she peeled open the envelope. Inside was a single card. Thick cardstock. Expensive. The ink was rich and deep, the handwriting simple and elegant. Please deliver your most beautiful arrangement to the Willowbridge estate. No budget. Just beauty. No signature. No details. Amelia read the words twice, then flipped the card over in hopes of finding more. Nothing. She stood still for a long moment, card in hand, heart beginning to thrum with a strange mix of curiosity and caution. The Willowbridge estate had long been a myth in the town, a grand mansion on the edge of the forest, once belonging to a steel tycoon whose family had vanished from public life decades ago. For years it had sat empty, overgrown and crumbling. Until recently. Whispers had trickled through the town like mist, the estate had been sold. Purchased, reportedly, for an unimaginable sum by a reclusive billionaire no one had ever seen. The townspeople buzzed with theories. A tech mogul? A foreign prince? An eccentric celebrity? No one knew for sure. And now, suddenly, that person wanted flowers from her shop. She stared at the card again. Her most beautiful arrangement. That meant different things to different people. Beauty was subjective. But she knew exactly which arrangement she would create. She worked in silence that morning, her hands moving with purpose as she crafted a bouquet not of flashy colors or exotic imports, but of feeling: soft peach roses for grace, white lilacs for memory, eucalyptus leaves for quiet strength, and sprigs of baby's breath that felt like whispers of something long forgotten. It was the kind of bouquet that remembered things. She wrapped it carefully, tied it with silk ribbon, and wrote no card. Whoever had sent for it hadn't asked for one. And somehow, Amelia sensed this bouquet wasn't meant to speak for her, it was meant to speak for them. Later that afternoon, she drove toward the estate, her little truck rattling along the old road that wound through trees and forgotten time. The forest thickened as she approached, and then the trees parted, and there it was. The Willowbridge estate. Majestic and still, like something from a dream, or a story you'd half believed was fiction. The mansion was massive, framed by tall oaks and a winding stone drive. Fresh ivy climbed the old stone walls. The windows glinted in the sun, though behind them the rooms looked impossibly dark. The tall gates creaked open the moment her truck appeared. No one had called ahead. No cameras in sight. And yet, somehow, they knew she was coming. Amelia's throat tightened as she stepped out, cradling the bouquet. Her boots crunched against gravel as she walked slowly up the path. She expected a groundskeeper or maid. A security guard. But instead, the door opened to a tall man in a charcoal suit, face unreadable, posture perfectly still. "You're Ms. Quinn?" he asked. She nodded. "Delivery for the owner." He nodded, accepted the bouquet carefully, and gestured toward the wide doorway. "He asked that you bring it in yourself." Amelia hesitated. She wasn't used to stepping inside the homes of strangers, especially not strangers who could afford marble staircases and velvet curtains. But some tug in her chest, pulled her forward. She stepped inside. The air was warm and quiet, scented faintly with sandalwood and something else she couldn't name. The hallway stretched long and grand, paintings hung on either side, none familiar. The man in the suit walked ahead of her, his steps soundless. Then she felt it. A presence. She didn't see him at first. But she felt him. A figure standing just beyond the main hall, on the second-floor landing, partially hidden by the railing and shadow. He didn't speak. But he was watching her. She could feel his eyes. She looked up slowly. A man stood there. Tall. Dressed simply. No jewelry, no flash. He didn't move. Didn't introduce himself. He just watched. Amelia's breath caught. For a moment, a wild, impossible thought danced in her mind. But she brushed it away. No. It couldn't be. She lowered her gaze, nodded once to the silent man above, and handed the bouquet to the butler. "Here you go," she murmured. "I hope he finds it beautiful." Then she turned, heart pounding against her ribs, and made her way back through the grand doors. She didn't look back. But had she glanced over her shoulder, she would have seen the man reach into his coat pocket. Slowly, with reverent fingers, he pulled out something small. Old. A bracelet. Frayed, faded, but still whole. Still beaded in turquoise and gold, with a chipped crescent moon charm glinting in the light. He held it like it was more precious than any diamond, watching her disappear down the drive. And though he didn't smile, something in his eyes softened. Some faces never leave you, because they were never just faces. They were moments. Lifelines. Lifetimes ago. For 3 days, Amelia couldn't stop thinking about the man on the balcony. She had only seen his silhouette. The shape of his shoulders. The stillness in his posture. But something about him had knocked loose a memory she hadn't realized was still lodged deep in her chest. She didn't tell anyone about the delivery. Not the strange letter. Not the mysterious estate. Not the man watching her like he knew her story better than she did herself. It felt too fragile, like saying it aloud would make it vanish. Instead, she went back to her shop. Back to arranging peonies in vases and ringing up familiar customers. Back to her routines, the safe, quiet ones. But something had shifted. It was in the way she paused a little longer at the window now, watching the street as if something, or someone, might reappear. On the 4th day, it happened. The bell above the flower shop's door chimed. Amelia didn't look up at first. She was behind the counter, wrapping a bouquet for Mrs. Emerson's anniversary. "Just a minute," she called cheerfully. "Almost done here." Then she turned. And the words caught in her throat. He was standing there. Eli. Not a boy anymore. Taller. His jaw sharper. His presence more grounded. But his eyes, those storm-colored, soul-deep eyes, were exactly the same. And they were on her. He didn't speak. Didn't smile. He just stood in the soft glow of the shop, like the world had gone quiet for this moment to happen. Amelia's heart thudded once, hard, and then silence. "Eli," she breathed, almost unsure she'd said it aloud. His lips parted. "You remember?" "Of course I do," she whispered. "I never forgot." He stepped closer, and she saw it, wrapped around his wrist, still whole after all these years, the bracelet. Beaded, worn, but unmistakable. Her bracelet. The one she gave him in the rain. The one she made with her own hands at 17, not knowing it would become a thread tying 2 lives together. Amelia blinked. "You still have it?" Eli glanced down at the beads, a rare softness pulling at his expression. "I wore it every day. Even when I didn't know why." She swallowed hard. "Why, now? Why come back?" Eli looked around the shop, as if taking in everything, the faded photos pinned to the walls, the chalkboard menu of seasonal blooms, the cluttered beauty of a life lived gently. Then he met her gaze again. "I looked for you once I had the power to," he said quietly. "When I left Willowbridge. I had nothing. No family. No future. Just that moment. Just you." Amelia's breath caught. Her fingers curled around the counter for balance. "I built a life," he continued, voice steady, "but something was always missing. I didn't know what until I opened a box last year and found this bracelet. And then I remembered everything. The bookstore. The rain. The way you crossed the street without hesitation. You didn't ask what was wrong. You didn't pity me. You just saw me." A silence settled between them. The kind that holds meaning too heavy for words. She stepped out from behind the counter, slowly, cautiously, like approaching something sacred. "You own the estate," she said, though it wasn't really a question. Eli nodded once. "The flowers, that delivery was for you." "I needed to see if your heart was still the same," he replied. "And it is." Amelia looked down, tears pressing behind her eyes. "I wasn't sure you'd remember me. Or even the bracelet. I thought maybe it was just a moment for me." "It was the moment that changed everything," he said, his voice low. "You gave me something I didn't think I deserved, to be seen. And when someone gives you that, you don't forget them." Her throat tightened. "Why didn't you say something at the estate? You were there. Watching me." "I wanted to," he admitted. "But I was afraid. What if time had changed everything? What if you didn't recognize me at all?" She stepped closer. I didn't recognize your face. But something in me knew. Their eyes met again, and for a heartbeat, the years melted away. They were 17 again. Rain-soaked. Strangers on a sidewalk. Hearts bruised, but not broken. Amelia reached out slowly, her fingers brushing the bracelet on his wrist. It still fits. Eli smiled, just barely. So do you. The shop bell chimed again as someone passed by on the street, but neither of them looked away. I'm not the same person I was back then, she said softly. Neither am I, he replied. But the truth is, I don't want to be. Because who I was didn't have you. A pause. Then, can I take you to lunch, he asked, almost shyly. Talk. No pressure. No expectations. I want to sit across from you and catch up on everything I missed. Amelia nodded, the corners of her lips lifting. You missed a lot. I know, he said. But I'm here now. If you'll let me be. And in the soft light of her little flower shop, surrounded by blossoms and memory, Amelia realized something. He hadn't come back by accident. He'd come home. They met at the old garden cafe tucked between the ivy-covered alleys of downtown Willowbridge. It was the kind of place you wouldn't notice unless someone pointed it out. Amelia had always loved it, quiet, filled with sunlight and creeping vines, with wind chimes that whispered in the breeze like secrets. She didn't dress up. She didn't know how. So she wore what she always did, a linen blouse, jeans, her hair pinned up in a loose twist. She brought no makeup. No script. Just herself, the same way she had been that day in the rain, offering a part of her heart to a boy who hadn't asked for it but clearly needed it. When she arrived, Eli was already seated beneath the trellis of wisteria. His back was to her, his posture relaxed but not slouched. A man used to waiting. Not impatient. Not nervous. Simply present. She paused at the entrance. He turned. And for a moment, everything fell silent again. Amelia crossed the gravel path, her heart oddly calm this time. No trembling hands. No cracked voice. Just this surreal, beautiful sense of stepping into something meant. Hi, she said softly. Hi, he replied, rising to pull out her chair. The moment felt old-fashioned. But not performative. Just, respectful. Gentle. As she sat down, he gestured to the bracelet still wrapped around his wrist. I used to think this was a lucky charm, he said, but I think now it was more of a reminder. A reminder of what? She asked, her eyes tracing the beads, turquoise, white, and that tiny crescent moon still chipped on one side. That someone once saw me when no one else did. Amelia lowered her gaze. I remember wondering, after that day, if you even kept it. I didn't think I'd ever see it again. I never took it off, he said simply. Even when I had to sleep on park benches. Even when I made my first deal in a too small suit with holes in the pockets. Even when I bought the estate. She looked up, surprised. Even then. Especially then. The server arrived, and they ordered without ceremony. Soup and warm bread. Chamomile tea. A slice of lemon cake to share. They didn't talk business. Or history. Or about what came after the rain. Instead, they talked about small things. The bookstore where Amelia had spent hours after school. The dog Eli had secretly fed outside the group home. Her dream of opening a second flower shop near the lake. His childhood fantasy of learning to build treehouses. None of it world-shattering, but all of it deeply human. As they ate, a breeze stirred the vines overhead. Sunlight broke through, spilling gold across the table. And then, quietly, without preamble, Eli reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled something out. A small, flat box. Velvet. Midnight blue. He placed it gently in front of her. Amelia blinked. "What's this?" "Not what you think," he said, smiling just a little. "It's not expensive. Or flashy. It's just a piece of the story." She hesitated, then lifted the lid. Inside was a bracelet, but not hers. It was new. Made of dark cord, stitched by hand. And at its center, a single bead, a crescent moon carved from stone, smooth and pale, unchipped. Beside it sat a turquoise bead, just one, wrapped in silver wire. Her eyes softened. "I made it," Eli said. "With help, of course. I don't know how to tie knots as well as you. But, it's a gift. Not to repay what you gave me. That's impossible. Just to say. I remember. I still see you." Amelia touched the bracelet, her fingers light. "You made this for me?" He nodded. "So you don't feel invisible either?" Her throat tightened. Because somewhere inside her, despite all the years of keeping her head down, being strong, being polite, being dependable, she had felt invisible. Amelia reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Not a grand gesture. Just contact. Quiet. Steady. "You don't owe me anything, Eli," she whispered. "I know," he said. "But some moments deserve to be honored." The world around them softened. People passed by. Birds chirped. Cups clinked on saucers. But inside that little garden cafe, time slowed down, folding itself gently around two people who had once been strangers, connected by a rainy day and a bracelet. He helped her slip it on. It fit perfectly. As she looked down at the beads on her wrist, something stirred deep in her chest. Not love. Not yet. But recognition. Of kindness. Of something rare. Of a story that had been paused mid-sentence and was, somehow, now being continued. "Do you believe in full circles?" he asked her. She looked up at him. "Only when they're real." "They are," he said. "When the right person draws them." Amelia smiled, the first real one in days. The kind that reached her eyes and warmed her ribs. Then she leaned back, sipped her tea, and let herself be seen, completely. Not for the shop she ran. Not for the mother she took care of. Not for the town she kept smiling for. But for the girl who once crossed a street in the rain, and gave something away that was never meant to be forgotten. Sometimes, the things people carry aren't visible, until someone finally asks what they've been holding all along. It was nearly dusk when they left the cafe. The wind had picked up slightly, the air carrying that late autumn chill that hinted at coming snow. The kind of cold that lingered at the back of your throat and made you walk just a little closer to the person beside you. They didn't speak much on the way to the park. It was instinctive, how they ended up there, an unspoken agreement that the next part of the conversation needed space, trees, and silence between words. Eli walked with his hands in his coat pockets. Amelia kept hers loosely crossed, her fingers brushing the new bracelet now snug around her wrist. They stopped at a wooden bench under an old maple tree, leaves scattered at their feet in burnt orange and brittle yellow. The lake shimmered nearby, quiet and endless. Eli sat first, resting his forearms on his knees. Amelia sat beside him, but didn't look at him, not yet. She waited. He let the silence stretch, but not out of hesitation. He was gathering. Choosing the right place to begin. Finally, he spoke. "My real name isn't just Eli. It's Elias Reese Calloway." She blinked. "Calloway, as in Calloway Ventures?" He nodded slowly, still not looking at her. "My birth parents owned it. They were killed in a car accident when I was 9. I was in the back seat." Amelia turned toward him now. He wasn't crying. But his jaw was clenched tight, like it had taken him years to learn how to say it without falling apart. "I was passed around after that," he continued. Relatives argued over money, not over me. When the trust fund was locked in legal disputes, I got left behind. Ended up in the foster system. That's how I landed in Willowbridge for a while. She remembered. That lost look in the library. The hollowed-out silence in his eyes. The boy who didn't speak, not because he didn't want to, but because he'd already said goodbye to too much. I didn't know all of this, she murmured. You weren't supposed to, he said. No one was. Eli looked down at his hands, like they belonged to someone else. When I turned 18, the court finally released access to what was left of the estate. I changed my name officially. Built a new company from what they left behind. Tech investments. Sustainability projects. I did it quietly. I didn't want anyone tying me to the Callaway name. I didn't want the sympathy. Or the legacy. She let his words settle between them. Why now, she asked. Why come back here? He paused. Because I realized I built everything, but I was still lonely. I had all this success, but none of it ever felt like mine. The only time I ever felt truly seen was that day. With you. Amelia's throat tightened. Eli exhaled, a shaky breath. I used to wonder what would have happened if I'd said thank you that day. If I'd been brave enough to speak. But all I could do was nod. You didn't have to say anything, she replied gently. You said it with your eyes. I wanted to find you earlier, he admitted. But every time I thought about it, I felt like I wasn't ready. Like I didn't deserve to be remembered by you. She shook her head. That's not how memory works. He looked at her then, and it was like time folded between their gazes. The years. The miles. The silence. All of it dissolving like fog in morning light. I don't want to be invisible anymore, he said softly. Not to you. Amelia reached out slowly and placed her hand over his. His fingers curled around hers with a quiet desperation, like he'd been waiting to hold something that didn't slip away. You're not, she whispered. Not to me. They sat there in silence, but this time, it was a different kind of quiet. Not heavy. Not lonely. Just, still. Together. Then she smiled faintly. You know what's funny? He tilted his head. What? I thought about you every time it rained. Eli smiled too. I thought about you every time I felt like giving up. For a moment, they just sat there, under the canopy of a maple tree, two souls that had wandered far and found their way back. Not by accident. But by threads invisible to the rest of the world. I was never sure if I imagined you, she said, voice barely a whisper. If you were real, or just a story I told myself to feel brave. I've wondered the same about you, he replied. They laughed, softly, like the sound had been waiting a long time to be free. He stood up, offering her his hand. Walk with me. She took it without hesitation. As they walked along the lake, the wind catching her hair, his footsteps steady beside hers, Amelia thought about all the things she didn't know, and didn't need to. Because some stories weren't about understanding every chapter. They were about recognizing the pages that changed you. And Eli? He had been one of hers. Some endings aren't endings at all, just beginnings disguised in soft light. It began like any other morning in Willowbridge, quiet, slow, and kissed with the scent of frost. Amelia unlocked the doors of her flower shop as the town yawned awake. The wooden sign creaked above her head, the painted words a little faded but still proud, Petal and Pine. Inside, sunlight poured through the front windows, falling across the rows of fresh arrangements, dahlias, peonies, thistles, and delicate baby's breath. She took a deep breath, the air filled with the scent of jasmine and green stems, and tucked a stray hair behind her ear. It had been a week since that evening in the park. A week of shared dinners. Quiet conversations. Long walks down old streets. Eli hadn't rushed anything. He never did. He simply showed up, each day, with small offerings. A cup of tea, a wrapped sandwich, an extra set of hands during her busiest hours. There was no arrogance in his gestures. No grand declarations. Just presence. Consistency. A kind of love that was learning to breathe. But today felt different. Amelia noticed it first in the way the town seemed unusually still. The usual chatter from the cafe across the street had quieted. Her delivery driver, Davy, waved at her as he passed by, but it was slower than usual, with a smile that said something's coming. She looked around, puzzled. And then the bell over the shop door rang. Eli stepped in, not in his usual jeans and wool coat, but in a soft gray suit, tailored to him like poetry written in fabric. He held a bouquet in one hand, not the usual florist's bundle, but something wild and untamed. Lavender, sage, soft yellow ranunculus, and a single white tulip in the center. He smiled. She blinked. "You look," she began, then trailed off. "Like I'm about to do something crazy," he teased. "Like you're about to change everything," she whispered. He offered her the bouquet. "I asked someone once what to give the girl who saved your life with a bracelet. They said flowers were a start." She laughed, even as her throat tightened. "But this isn't just about flowers," he said gently. Eli stepped forward, pulling from his pocket a folded piece of paper. He unfolded it with care and handed it to her. Amelia stared down at the letterhead. The Willowbridge Foundation for Young Entrepreneurs in Sustainability and Arts. Initial endowment, $5 million. Founder, Elias Reese Calloway. She looked up sharply. "What is this?" "It's yours," he said. "Yours and mine. I bought the old library building. It's going to be a community space, for kids like I was. For dreamers like you. For all the people who get overlooked because no one ever stopped to see who they were becoming." Amelia stared at him, silent. "I'm not giving this to you as a thank you," Eli said. "And not as some romantic gesture. I'm giving it because you've always been that kind of person. The kind who builds. The kind who believes. And the world needs more of that." She swallowed, her fingers trembling around the letter. "I don't have the right words," she said. "I don't know how to." "You don't have to," he said. And then, slowly, he dropped to one knee. Not with a ring. Not with a speech. Just with eyes that saw her, wholly and completely. Amelia Quinn, the girl who gave everything when she had almost nothing. "I don't want to be a chapter in your life. I want to be the home where every version of you is safe." She covered her mouth, breath catching. "I'm not asking for an answer now," he added. "I just needed you to know that the boy you once saved, came back to love you with everything he built." Her tears fell silently, one by one, soft as the petals that lined her shop. She nodded. Not because she was overwhelmed. But because some stories don't need more time. They just need recognition. She reached down, cupped his face, and whispered, "You already are my home." He stood, and she met him halfway, folding into his arms as if she'd been waiting for this embrace her entire life. Outside, the street came alive again. Davy cheered. Someone clapped. The cafe across the road whistled through their open window. But Amelia didn't hear any of it. In that moment, there was only them. And the memory of rain. And the promise of everything that would come next. Later that night, as they stood together beneath the awning of her shop, the sky opened up and poured again. Just like it had all those years ago. But this time, they didn't run. They stood in it, soaked, laughing, with their hands clasped, their bracelets side by side. The past had found its way home. And in the rhythm of falling rain, a girl who once gave away a bracelet finally received everything her heart had quietly hoped for. Not because she asked. But because she gave first. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, emotional stories that stay with you long after the screen fades.